The extreme difficulty of scaling production of new technology is not well understood. It's 1,000 to 10,000% harder than making a few prototypes. Building the machine that makes the machine is vastly harder than making the machine itself. Production at scale is 100 times harder than making a prototype. There is no movie that illustrates this. There is no movie that illustrates this.
I can tell that story. Look, I'm not a great filmmaker, but I've lived through the process of taking a simple idea into mass production, and I can give you a glimpse into that world of production hell that few people know about. You might be amazed at how this has been going on in so many places for years, and you just now get a chance to see behind the curtain. You might gain a new respect for the people who have pulled this off, and you might want to be one of them. I'm going to show you 3 aspects of this truth. First, I'll tell you a story of an invention I came up with in the 1980s. I went from the concept to a good prototype, cheap, quick, and easy. But producing 80,000 of them to sell was incredibly hard for me. Next, I'll show you a little historical information about moving from prototype to production. Finally, I'll share some thoughts about the invention process and some surprising reasons that this story has never been told, and even why some people don't want it to be told. Maybe this will inspire others who can more powerfully tell this story. As a young man, I tried to break into inventive work. I worked on a high-speed keyboard that I patented. I worked with an idea for a wheel that had power in the spokes, only to find out that it was patented years earlier by a Czechoslovakian inventor. I built an underwater chainsaw to protect boats from pier posts that had been sheared off by the ice on Lake St. Clair by Detroit. But the furthest I ever got with an invention was a toy I invented after we moved in near the Indianapolis 500.
While the sounds of the track echo throughout the town of Speedway now, one nearby resident is also hearing the sounds of another type of Indy race car. Zoom balloons. They are balloons with a special surprise that spins inside. Marvin has converted his basement into a Zoom balloon factory. He makes the race cars himself. Once they come off the assembly line, they are placed inside the balloon and packaged. Marvin hopes the Zoom balloon money he makes will help finance other inventions he has on the drawing board.
My mother always told me if you tried something really hard, you could probably do it, so I'm trying.
Wendy Stock, Indiana Nightly News.
In the 1980s, we moved to Speedway, Indiana, and I was washing windows for a living. During the month of May, we watched thousands of people walk by on their way to the Indy 500. Neighbors were taking advantage of the race crowds by charging people to park in their yards or selling things. I thought of a recent fad. They were putting teddy bears inside of a clear balloon to give as a gift item. I thought that maybe something like that would sell, just a cardboard race car inside of a balloon. But soon I imagined the car rolling around inside the balloon, and I thought that was way more fun. On the way home from work, I bought some balloons that you could see through. I put one of my kids' little Hot Wheels cars inside the balloon and tried to make it roll around, but it didn't work very well. It was tough to get the car to land right side up and to get it positioned so that it would roll. It worked, but it was too much trouble to be fun. I took the wheels off an old Hot Wheels car, glued them to a little rectangle of mat board, and it worked perfectly. It no longer mattered if the car was upside down. It was easy to get it lined up, and when I gave a quick flick of my wrist, it just rolled around inside. It was great, and it also made a zooming sound. I wasn't even expecting that. I was excited about how cool it was, and everybody I showed it to thought it was great. So that was my experience with just the prototype process. Get the idea, one evening, $4, zero risk. The excitement faded fast, though, because I realized to make this worthwhile, I would have to make a lot of these. And if I made the cars the way I made the prototype, it would take forever. It was a bit overwhelming. We were expecting our 3rd child. I barely made enough money to pay our bills. I had almost zero credit. All the invention ideas I'd worked on before had never made me a dime, and yet they had cost lots of time and lots of money. I really need to support my family, and I don't need any more feelings of failure. It made more sense just to forget this and put my efforts into my window washing work. But there were two thoughts that I just couldn't shake. One was that this might be something I actually could do. Maybe this was the open door to the life I always wanted, to be a successful inventor. Plus, it was very sad for me to think that this idea that I was holding in my hands would never go anywhere and nobody would even know about it. I really want to do this. I began to sketch and wrestle with ways to make these efficient. I did some figures literally on the back of an envelope to see if I could imagine a path to making this work. It was exciting. I was leaping into the unknown. I'd have to invent an efficient process to produce them at low cost. I'd have to find inexpensive materials. I'd have to design them to look nice, not just a stupid piece of cardboard and some glue. This all took place before the internet, and finding materials and information was very different than it is today. I had the public library, I had the Thomas Register, I had phone calls and letters to different suppliers. I shopped for large quantities of little tiny wheels. They were way too expensive. I thought maybe somebody who was already making little toy cars would sell me some of their wheels. I wrote letters to different toy car companies. I only got an answer from one. It was an off-brand toy car company from New Jersey, and they agreed to sell me the wheels. It was scary for me. I'm putting a check in the mail for over 3 times what my house payment was, and I was hoping that someday I would get a bunch of wheels from China. Waiting for the wheels to arrive, I worked on the rest of the machinery. I had an idea for injected molded plastic car bodies, but when I found out how much it cost to make the mold, it was way too expensive for me. I settled on cardstock, folded and glued. The printing would only have to be on one side, they would be very inexpensive, and I could actually have that done. A local print shop printed on cardstock the artwork that I provided for the race cars. They scored along the fold lines and then they cut them into the little strips so that I could make the cars. These worked wonderfully. But the assembly was still up in the air. Putting them together by hand, it was almost impossible to get the axles straight. They had to be held by something while the glue hardened. I toyed with the idea of a conveyor belt machine. It seemed silly at first, but it actually worked out well. I went to work building the machine. Most of the components of the machine were just made out of scrap wood that was already in the basement of the house when we moved in. I would look at what I'd built, try to think of what it needed. I needed a thin conveyor belt, so I went to a place in town that sold and serviced conveyor belts. The guy asked me what I needed. I think he was expecting a part number or a specific machine that I had or something, but when I began to explain to him what I was doing, he just said, "Come here," and he took me back into the warehouse part. He just found a scrap that had been cut off of the work on some other conveyor belt machine. He said, "There you go, no charge." I want to pause here to acknowledge all the goodness that was shown to me by people as I approached them. The guy with the conveyor belt gave me that for free. The company that did the plastic molding, he immediately could tell I couldn't afford what he needed, and yet he took me on a tour of the factory and showed me how they make injection molded plastic parts. The packaging envelopes, the display box guy, any or all of these people could have blown me off. I had to be the smallest customer they'd ever seen for their particular service or product, and yet they gave me what I needed. Even one of the race car drivers, Rick Mears, was very kind to me, and he referred me to his mother, who bought some of my Zoom balloons to sell with her other race merchandise. When I got home with my donated conveyor belt, I connected it to the machine, wrapping it around lawnmower wheels, and the front wheel had a pivot, a steering mechanism, so that the wheel and the belt would go straight as it continued to run. The back wheel was held by 2 bolts. 2 bolts tightened the same amount would put the proper tension on the belt, and tightening one of them a little than the other gave the steering effect for that end of the belt. The brackets that held the axles in place were actually electrician supplies. I didn't even know what they were for, but they looked like something that would help me hold the cars. It was easier to find things that were close to what I needed and modify them than it was to make everything from scratch. One puzzle with the machine was getting the conveyor belt to stop just at the right spot. The foot switch control was not precise enough, and I'd get tired having to operate it thousands of times. So I connected a little switch, wired in parallel with the foot switch. It would send power to the motor anytime the car carrier was not in the stopping place. That way, each time I pushed the foot switch, I didn't have to be precise. I could just release it, and the motor would run until the belt reached the next stopping point. It made production bearable. I was working hours on end making the little cars, 2 stripes of glue on each one. It occurred to me that the front axle would be held straight by the folded front edge of the car body. It didn't need glue at either end of the axle, but the back axle did need glue at either end. And I realized that I could accomplish that structure with a single diagonal stripe of hot glue across the car body. This was a simple change in procedure, but it doubled the speed of my work. I don't know how many people have experienced the joy of that kind of discovery, but that was fun. Much of the construction of my little factory went pretty well, just solving puzzle after puzzle of how to get things to work with my limited skills and resources. But I promised to show you production hell. And for me, that happened late one night when I was well into the project. One night I was working on the part of the machine that loads the wheels and axles onto the carriers. It was maddening. The axles would jam up and freeze the belt. Then I would loosen the adjustment screw a little bit, and then the axles would come through and they would just dump all over the floor. For several hours, I thought I had solved this. But then, during testing, disaster would strike again. I was so frustrated, I was about ready to just smash the machine with a hammer and forget the whole thing. I just said, to hell with it, and I just sat down on a box. The only thoughts I had were the shame of failure. All of the money and time that I'd spent on this worthless junk that now filled up my basement. The embarrassment in front of everybody who knew about my project, knowing that I couldn't do it. The shame of knowing my kids were going to grow up thinking what a loser I am. Then, in this emptiness of my mind, an image came to my mind. It was my toothbrush, my cheap black plastic toothbrush. I just looked at this image and I didn't even care. But then I got the image of the bristles of the toothbrush resisting the push of the car axles. I latched onto that idea. This would work. I went upstairs and got the toothbrush and I mounted it on the machine. When I tested it, the angle was wrong, so I bent the head of the toothbrush by heating up the plastic and moving it about 30 degrees, and then I started working with it. And it never needed another adjustment. It worked flawlessly for tens of thousands of cars. I thought that getting the cars made was the only real challenge, but it soon became apparent that getting the cars inside the balloons in large numbers was going to be very difficult. After putting a few in by hand, my fingers would hurt, and it was hard to get the car in without damaging it. I don't remember who recommended it, but a farmer's tool called an elastrator was one of my attempts to open the balloon necks. But eventually, I had to purpose build a tool that did exactly what I needed. I needed 4 pins close together. They'd move apart to a rectangle just the right size. I came up with a mechanism for this after spending time drawing arcs on paper with a compass. It was thrilling when the solution came into focus. Then it was time for building the assembly stations and putting each element in the perfect place to make for efficient assembly. With these tools, the embodiment of problem-solving ideas, I was able to make plenty of these to sell outside the racetrack, in counter displays at local convenience stores, bulk sales to hotels who put a Zoom balloon in each room for race weekend. I even got a number of orders from ad specialty firms, Zoom balloons with different corporate logos on the balloons to give away. The first such order was for the Detroit Grand Prix. Remember, the point of this movie is to compare the difficulty of making a prototype to the difficulty of production. Here's a list of what I did for my simple prototype, followed by a list of what I did to actually produce this simple toy. Please note that my little prototype took only one evening. Most of the steps for production took days or weeks for each step. For me, production was far more than 100 times harder than the prototype. Plus, with a working prototype, you feel success when it performs. But the success of your production is only complete if lots of people want your product. You only get to claim success if you change the world, at least a little bit. Making a successful prototype is like having a great conversation with yourself. But producing your product and introducing it to the world is actually a relationship. Most folks know some technology history and maybe a little about mass production, but we need to uncover the crucial history, the real story of how so many people can have so many nice things. The invention of the light bulb is the classic invention story. We even use a little light bulb above someone's head as an icon for a new idea. How did the prototype work for the light bulb compare to the actual production work that it took to get it out to everyone? Edison had decided that his light bulb would be sold for 40 cents. In the first year of production, it cost him $1.10 to make each one, so he lost 70 cents per light bulb. The second year, it was 70 cents, so he was losing 30 cents. The next year, he only lost 10 cents for each light bulb that he sold. The following year, they got production costs down to 37 cents per bulb, and they could finally start making a profit. But making light bulbs was only part of the problem. They wouldn't do any good without generators and wiring and switches and sockets. All these things didn't exist yet. It was way tougher than just getting a few working lamps. And the obstacles were not just the technology. The gas companies had a profitable business lighting homes and offices with little flame jets. They did whatever they could to stop the electric light's success. They used their influence with politicians and journalists. It suddenly became difficult for Edison to get the permits he needed to dig into the New York streets to bury his electrical cables. And the news would dramatize stories like a horse getting an electric shock or an electrical fire at the Vanderbilt mansion. We've all heard the old saying, build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. The truth is, if the path to your door is busy, it probably isn't full of mousetrap customers. It's full of lawyers from Legacy Mousetrap Incorporated and other people trying to shut you down. The details of this history are fascinating, but most people don't take the time to read the details. Another interesting comparison of the initial prototype to mass production is the work of Tesla. Nikola Tesla was a brilliant inventor, and he's well known for his contribution to polyphase AC power and his AC induction motor. But he never put any of those things into production. I think without the work of George Westinghouse and his engineers, Tesla's name might have been lost to history. There's a great book about how Edison, Tesla, Westinghouse, and others brought about our electrical age. But why is it that no one ever tells the story of production? People like stories, and the struggling heroic inventor is a great story. The popular stories skip the production part. It's too complicated, and most people would lose interest. Even in my very simple little toy making story, I left out half the details. If I put them in, nobody would want to watch the movie. There's marketing pressure to hide high volume production. When you see an ad for an expensive car, it will be alone on a beautiful isolated road, never parked beside 1,000 cars just like it. So even though mass production is the only way for everyone to have affordable things, we'll rarely see it. Let's think about the concept of invention. It's a great part of being human. The process of invention starts with an idea. When you build one, it's called the embodiment of the invention. But if the idea was something to help everyone, then maybe it's not really embodied until it's produced and in the hands of the people who need it. I love the memory of my little toy car rolling around inside the balloon. It didn't solve world hunger, but when people smiled and said they wanted one, I was so happy that they liked my little idea.